In the shadows of the ancient Persian Empire, beneath the grandeur of palaces and the pomp of royal courts, there existed a world so secretive and foreboding that few dared to speak of it aloud. The cult of Mithra, shrouded in layers of mysticism and coded rituals, held dominion over the minds and souls of those who sought its embrace. From the very first moment, the novices, young men drawn by curiosity, ambition, or whispers of power, were ensnared in a labyrinth of fear, obedience, and unwavering secrecy. The initiation process was not merely ceremonial. It was a journey into the very essence of human endurance and psychological manipulation. The air itself seemed charged with tension, the sacred chambers illuminated by flickering torchlight that cast monstrous shadows on the cold stone walls, whispering promises of divine revelation and threats of eternal disgrace. To enter was to surrender, entirely and irrevocably, to a system that demanded absolute loyalty, where every glance, every hesitation, could be scrutinized and judged by those who had already walked the path. These novices were stripped of their worldly identities, their names replaced by ranks within a hierarchy that was as enigmatic as it was unforgiving. They were taught to revere symbols that simultaneously inspired awe and terror, depictions of the cosmic bull, celestial fire, and divine battles that mirrored the inner conflict imposed upon them. The teachings were delivered in cryptic words, rituals performed in near-total darkness, and silence enforced with an intensity that bordered on the oppressive. The novices' minds were molded like clay, pressured to absorb lessons of obedience, secrecy, and transcendence that demanded both devotion and fear. Even before their bodies were tested, their spirits were subjected to trials that eroded any sense of autonomy. The cult operated not merely as a religious order, but as an intricate psychological machine, calibrating every emotion, every thought of its followers to reinforce submission and loyalty. Here, the concept of choice was an illusion. Every step, every gesture, every word was measured, judged, and woven into the intricate tapestry of initiation. Observing from the shadows, the higher initiates appeared almost omnipotent, their eyes carrying the weight of secrets that could shatter minds, and their presence a constant reminder that failure was neither forgiven nor forgotten. To the uninitiated, it would seem unimaginable, almost barbaric, yet for those within, it was the pathway to a sacred truth, whispered only in the darkest corners of temples, known to few, feared by all, and coveted by the ambitious. Every novice, stepping into the hallowed halls of Mithra, felt a profound mixture of awe and dread, knowing that their journey had begun and that what awaited them was far worse than mere physical trials. It was an assault on the very essence of their being. If you are captivated by the horrifying and mysterious depths of these ancient rites, leave a comment below, hit like, and subscribe to uncover more secrets buried in the shadows of history. The selection of novices in the cult of Mithra was far from random. It was a meticulously orchestrated process designed to identify those whose minds could be bent, whose fears could be exploited, and whose ambitions could be manipulated. Candidates were often drawn from the fringes of society, young men with desires for status, knowledge, or the forbidden, their hearts burning with curiosity and a latent hunger for belonging. Before even setting foot in the inner sanctum, they were observed, their behaviors studied with almost clinical precision. Whispered rumors of the cult's secrets reached them, sparking fascination and a trembling excitement that made them vulnerable to suggestion. Isolation was the first weapon employed. Novices were removed from their families, communities, and familiar surroundings, creating a void filled only by the doctrines of the cult. In this vacuum, the teachings of Mithra were delivered with deliberate ambiguity, a combination of scripture, parable, and ritual that was as confounding as it was alluring. Psychological control began subtly. Obedience was rewarded, hesitation punished. Trust was built, then systematically undermined. Loyalty was praised, while individuality was vilified. The minds of these young men became malleable under constant scrutiny. Every reaction, every emotion was a potential measure of worthiness, and even small errors could invite reprimand or ritualized humiliation. They were taught to fear the consequences of disobedience, not only in the mortal realm, but in the metaphysical, the promises of eternal disgrace or spiritual exile hanging over their heads like a dark cloud. Through this meticulous conditioning, novices internalized the cult's hierarchies and values, seeing themselves not as independent agents, but as vessels for a higher, secret knowledge. The psychological grip of the cult was reinforced by staged ceremonies and controlled exposure to sacred symbols. The fire, the bull, the concealed temples, all were designed to evoke awe, obedience, and a subconscious fear that left the novice malleable. In this carefully constructed crucible, their moral compass and sense of self were gradually aligned with the will of the cult. By the time physical trials would begin, the novices had already surrendered much of their agency, primed to accept whatever the cult demanded, from the most extreme hardships to acts that would test the very limits of human endurance. This phase of recruitment and psychological control ensured that only those most susceptible to manipulation would advance, creating a cadre of initiates whose loyalty was absolute and whose minds were meticulously conditioned to embrace both the terrifying and the sacred as inseparable realities. As the novices progressed deeper into the inner sanctums of the Mithraic temples, the physical trials began, a calculated ordeal designed to test every sinew, every breath, and every ounce of endurance. These were no ordinary exercises or rites of passage. They were meticulously designed torments that blurred the line between sacred ritual and severe punishment. The candidates were subjected to extreme conditions, hours of fasting, exposure to scorching fires or chilling darkness, and grueling postures that bent the body almost to the breaking point. Pain was not incidental. It was integral. Each ache, each strain was a lesson, a message from the cult that the body was secondary to the will of Mithra, and the obedience owed to the hierarchy of initiates. The rituals often included simulated dangers, illusions of imminent death, and orchestrated confrontations with fear itself. The novice's heart would pound as if the pulse of the universe itself had accelerated, each beat a reminder of their vulnerability and insignificance. Yet, within this calculated torment, there was a strange allure, the promise of transcendence, of access to knowledge and power denied to the uninitiated. Every test was laden with symbolism. Crawling through narrow, suffocating passages represented rebirth. Enduring fire or cold mirrored the trials of the cosmos, and symbolic confrontations with the bull echoed the eternal struggle between life and death, chaos and order. The initiates who endured these trials were marked, not just physically but psychologically, the lessons of obedience and submission etched into their very being. Each ritual left an indelible imprint, a reminder that survival was inseparable from devotion. Yet, even at their most exhausted and fearful, the novices were never allowed respite from the gaze of higher initiates, whose eyes seemed to pierce into the core of the soul. The looming presence of these elders was both a comfort and a torment. A constant reminder that the trials were not merely for endurance, but for transformation. It was a brutal, beautiful cruelty. Every bruise, every shiver, every tremor of the body reinforced the hierarchies and mysteries of the cult, forging warriors not in steel or weaponry, but in resilience, secrecy, and a devotion so complete it bordered on the fanatic. Through these physical crucibles, the novices began the most harrowing journey of all, not into the temples, but into the depths of themselves, confronting fears that would haunt them, shaping minds to obey, to endure, and ultimately to revere the terrifying power of Mithra. Within the hidden chambers of the Mithraic temples, symbolism ruled as strictly as the rules themselves, wielded with a precision that was both awe-inspiring and cruel. Every image, every gesture, every flicker of torchlight was calculated to unsettle, to teach, and to indoctrinate. The bull, central to the Mithraic mythos, was more than a sacred creature. It was a mirror of human struggle and submission, a force that novices were forced to confront both, physically and spiritually. The act of striking, kneeling before, or witnessing the bull was never casual. It was a ritualized lesson in dominance, obedience, and mortality. Fire, ever present in the temples, was simultaneously purifier and tormentor, illuminating the sacred and highlighting the novice's vulnerability. The shadows it cast played tricks on perception, blending reality with fear, and leaving the mind unmoored from certainty. Every secret gesture of the higher initiates carried double meaning: a test, a warning, a lesson in humility that novices were expected to decode without question. Even the sacred texts, often recited in near-total darkness, were filled with cryptic metaphors that were as disorienting as they were instructive. This constant bombardment of symbols, combined with the ongoing physical and psychological trials, ensured that the novices' understanding of the world, of life, and of themselves became intertwined with the cult's doctrines. The cruel elegance of the rituals left no space for doubt. To misinterpret, to hesitate, or to falter could invite subtle punishments or humiliation, reinforcing the necessity of vigilance, devotion, and fear. Yet, within this oppressive framework, the allure of forbidden knowledge and the promise of belonging created a tension that was intoxicating. The novice learned that power came not from resistance but from surrender, and that the true mastery of the self was only achievable through the disciplined navigation of terror, pain, and obedience. These symbols, layered and unyielding, were not merely lessons, they were a language of control, a map of the soul's subjugation, and an invisible chain that bound the initiate to the cult. If you can imagine the psychological toll of such relentless symbolism, leave a comment below. Share your thoughts on how fear and devotion can intertwine in the darkest corners of human belief. As the novices endured the trials and absorbed the weight of symbolic teachings, a new phase of initiation awaited, one that revealed secrets so profound and terrifying that only the bravest could comprehend them. These were not mere teachings, they were hidden doctrines encoded in rituals, gestures, and sacred spaces, deliberately obscured to protect their potency. The higher initiates guided the neophytes through these revelations with meticulous care, ensuring that each insight arrived only when the novice had demonstrated endurance, obedience, and the ability to confront fear without faltering. Among these secrets were cosmological truths, allegories of life, death, and the eternal struggle of good against evil, and the mythic tales of Mithra that were far more violent and morally complex than any public myth would suggest. Knowledge came in fragments, often conveyed through allegorical enactments rather than words, forcing the novice to interpret, internalize, and live the lessons rather than merely memorize them. The process was painstaking, designed to immerse the neophyte in layers of meaning that could reshape perception, morality, and identity itself. Those who advanced found themselves standing on the precipice of understanding, peering into dimensions of existence that few dared to acknowledge. The sacred knowledge was intoxicating yet terrifying. It promised power, insight, and enlightenment, but demanded absolute secrecy, loyalty, and psychological resilience. Mistakes were not tolerated. A misinterpretation or display of doubt could result in intense reprimand, isolation, or ritualized correction. Only through rigorous devotion and the courage to confront both the visible and invisible forces of the cult could a novice access the full scope of these truths. Here, the line between initiation and transformation blurred. The candidate was no longer merely a student, but a vessel for the arcane and enigmatic, a living testament to the power of the Mithraic mysteries. The higher initiates ensured that these revelations were both awe-inspiring and terrifying, cultivating minds that could withstand the weight of forbidden knowledge while remaining obedient to the cult. At this stage, the novice understood that the journey was no longer about endurance alone. It was about the integration of fear, obedience, and insight into a singular devotion, shaping the very core of the self. By the time the novices reached the stage of oaths and blood pacts, their transformation was already profound. Yet the cult demanded one final, binding commitment. These were not casual promises, but solemn, irrevocable vows that entwined the initiate's very existence with the will of Mithra and the authority of the higher initiates. The ritual of the blood pact was designed to be both terrifying and sacred. Each novice would make a small incision, offering a drop of blood as a symbol of absolute loyalty and submission. This blood, mingled with incense, sacred oils, or the ceremonial elements of the temple, became a living testament to their devotion, a tangible link between mortal flesh and divine command. The words spoken during these oaths carried immense weight, invoking the wrath of the divine and the judgment of the cult should they be broken. Novices were made to understand, with chilling clarity, that betrayal or failure was not merely an abstract concept. It had consequences that could extend beyond the temporal, touching their spiritual essence and the eternal order of the cult. These pacts were deeply psychological as well. They reinforced fear, obedience, and a sense of belonging that transcended normal human bonds, binding the initiate not only to Mithra, but to the entire hidden hierarchy of the cult. The act of swearing such an oath was simultaneously empowering and terrifying. It demanded courage, trust, and an unwavering submission to forces that few outside the inner circle could comprehend. Through this process, the novices' minds were meticulously aligned with the cult's objectives, their personal identity subordinated to a collective devotion steeped in secrecy, terror, and reverence. They had become vessels of the Mithraic mysteries, their loyalty sealed in blood, their obedience absolute, and their understanding of the sacred intertwined irrevocably with their fear, devotion, and the clandestine power of the temple. Each oath served as a reminder that the path of initiation was irreversible, and that the higher initiates held not only authority, but the power to shape the very destiny of those who dared to walk this perilous journey. The final stage of initiation was a metamorphosis as profound as it was terrifying. The novices, once uncertain and fearful, emerged as fully transformed initiates, their minds and bodies sculpted by the relentless trials, symbolic teachings, and sacred oaths they had endured. This transformation was not merely ceremonial, it was psychological, a complete realignment of identity, morality, and perception. The higher initiates oversaw this final passage, guiding the neophytes through rituals that tested their loyalty, courage, and ability to confront the profound mysteries of life, death, and the cosmic struggle that Mithra embodied. The transformation was often subtle, yet undeniable. A shift in posture, gaze, and presence that marked the initiate as someone who had faced fear, pain, and uncertainty, and survived. They learned to internalize the symbols and teachings of the cult, allowing the sacred images, rituals, and allegories to become intrinsic to their consciousness. Fear, which had once dominated their hearts, was now tempered into reverence, a recognition that submission and devotion were the pathways to enlightenment. The psychological imprint of their journey manifested in absolute loyalty, an unwavering obedience that was both empowering and binding. In this final stage, novices understood the full gravity of their existence within the cult. They were no longer ordinary men, but vessels of secret knowledge, bearers of rituals that bound them to forces unseen, yet palpably powerful. They had been molded to embody the teachings, to uphold the hierarchy, and to perpetuate the sacred and terrifying mysteries of Mithra. The transformation was so complete that any thought of returning to a former life was inconceivable. Their identities had been irrevocably intertwined with the cult's hidden truths. Observers might have seen only devotion, yet beneath it lay a carefully forged obedience born of fear, ritual, and the relentless testing of body and soul. This profound change inspired awe, dread, and curiosity in equal measure, as those who witnessed it recognized the terrifying cost of such absolute transformation. If the depths of human endurance and the reshaping of the mind in the name of devotion fascinate you, leave a comment below and share your thoughts on the ultimate power of fear and loyalty in shaping identity. When examining the cult of Mithra alongside other ancient religious systems, its practices stand out for their intensity, secrecy, and psychological complexity. Unlike the public ceremonies of Greco-Roman or Mesopotamian religions, which focused on communal worship and observable rites, Mithraic rituals were hidden from all but the initiated, cloaked in darkness and layered with symbolism designed to challenge the very essence of the human spirit. While Egyptian mystery schools and Orphic cults also employed secret knowledge and initiation, Mithra's methods were uniquely harrowing in their combination of physical trial, psychological manipulation, and hierarchical control. Novices in these other traditions often faced symbolic tests or intellectual challenges. In the Mithraic cult, every test was meticulously calibrated to break down the individual and rebuild him in accordance with the cult's doctrines. The psychological conditioning, the carefully staged fears, and the integration of sacred violence set Mithraic initiation apart as a crucible that reshaped identity itself. Even in comparison to the Eleusinian mysteries, where the ultimate revelations were veiled in allegorical visions and controlled experiences of the divine, the Mithraic experience demanded submission not only of the mind, but of the body, emotions, and very essence of being. Each stage of advancement in Mithra was a relentless confrontation with mortality, obedience, and cosmic truths, more visceral and immediate than the philosophical or allegorical lessons of its contemporaries. These contrasts illuminate the unique terror and allure of Mithraic practices. Where other cults offered glimpses of wisdom, the Mithraic path forged warriors of the spirit through controlled suffering, secrecy, and transformation. By comparing these traditions, we see that while the human quest for transcendence and divine knowledge is universal, the methods by which this pursuit is enforced can vary dramatically. And in the case of Mithra, it was extreme, calculated, and profoundly formative. The legacy of the Mithraic cult extends far beyond the ancient temples and secret chambers, where initiates once trembled before fire and shadow. Though the cult itself eventually faded from public memory, its influence persisted in subtle and haunting ways, echoing through secret societies, mystical orders, and esoteric traditions that drew inspiration from its rituals and doctrines. The psychological methods perfected by the cult, the rigorous conditioning, the layering of fear and awe, the use of symbolic language to control perception, left an enduring imprint on the art of initiation itself. Later, secretive organizations, some cloaked in Christian or Gnostic trappings, adopted aspects of Mithraic secrecy, hierarchical control, and symbolic instruction, showing how the techniques of manipulation and transformation could outlive the deities themselves. Scholars and historians, piecing together the fragments of temples, inscriptions, and iconography, have discovered evidence of this dark resonance, revealing the cult's penchant for shaping human thought and behavior in ways that were as insidious as they were transformative. Even in modern imaginations, the allure of forbidden knowledge, hidden rites, and the disciplined subjugation of self owes a subtle debt to these ancient practices. The cult's emphasis on secrecy and selective revelation also contributed to a mystique that has persisted for centuries, inspiring speculation, myth, and sometimes fear in those who attempt to understand it. In many ways, the Mithraic legacy is not simply one of religious ritual, but of psychological mastery, a testament to the capacity of belief and fear to forge unbreakable bonds, mold minds, and shape identities long after the fires of the temples have gone cold. The shadow of Mithra persists, not in towering monuments or grand narratives, but in the invisible architecture of control, devotion, and the human fascination with the sacred and terrifying. The final reflection on the cult of Mithra reveals a truth both fascinating and chilling. The ancient rites were not merely ceremonies, but meticulously crafted systems of transformation, control, and psychological mastery. Initiates, drawn by curiosity or ambition, were subjected to trials that tested body, mind, and spirit, ultimately reshaping their very identities. Through extreme physical endurance, cryptic teachings, symbolic terror, and binding oaths, the novices became vessels of the cult's power, embodying devotion that was as unwavering as it was frightening. This intricate fusion of fear, obedience, and revelation ensured that only the most resilient could ascend, leaving a legacy of secrets, hidden knowledge, and practices that continued to echo in the shadows of history long after the temples themselves had vanished. The journey of the Mithraic initiate challenges our understanding of devotion, the allure of secret knowledge, and the human capacity to endure, forcing us to confront uncomfortable questions about the price of enlightenment and the boundaries of obedience. While the physical structures and rituals of the cult may be lost to time, the psychological and symbolic impact remains a testament to the dark ingenuity of human belief. For those captivated by the enigmatic and the forbidden, exploring the depths of these ancient mysteries invites reflection, fascination, and sometimes unease. If you found this journey into the shadowed rites of Mithra compelling, don't forget to subscribe. Leave your thoughts in the comments, and continue with us as we uncover more hidden truths from the ancient world in our next exploration.